writers, agents, and publishers, for the first time since the Gutenberg Press, find themselves lost in a maze of mystery as technology alters the shape of the publishing industry. Searching for Answers is a group of writers throwing pop culture, writing, and publishing into a crucible of clarity, passion, and humor. This group is the Write Pack. Welcome back to Write Pack Radio. This is your host, David Allen Lucas, author of science fiction, crime drama, articles on self-defense, articles on poetry, articles on music, and articles on articles. I am also president of St. Louis Writers Guild, and with me today is
Fedora Amos. I write Victorian whodunits, humorous ones, at least I like to think so, like Jack the Ripper in St. Louis, and soon to come out in February of 2016 is Mayhem at Buffalo Bill's Wild West, and I am president of Greater St. Louis Sisters in Crime.
My name is Jennifer Stolzer. I'm a children's book author and illustrator. My self-published picture book is available on Amazon called Dog Park. It's cute. And I'm actually having
cute little doggy
a book event if you're in the St. Louis area November 22nd, I believe, at the Dog Museum. So feel free to come out.
Excellent. And where can people see your other artwork besides the book?
My other artwork? You can always visit my portfolio site. It's jenniferstolzer.com.
There you go.
Or follow me on Tumblr. You can find me by searching my name.
Yes, and she is very active on Tumblr.
Too active on Tumblr.
Lee Savage, author of erotic vampire romance, erotic short tales, and under the name Carrie Lee Williams, I have a couple of children's books out, all available on Amazon.com.
I'm Melanie Claney, author of science fiction, fantasy, and nonfiction.
Okay, and today this is going to be the last of a list episodes for a while. We know we've been kind of hitting lists a lot. So today we're going to talk about KURT Vonnegut's 8 basics of creative writing. Now there's multiple articles out there. I'm going to be reading from Gotham Writers, but I've seen a couple other ones that just repeat the same list. So hey, follow along with your favorite Google website. And on that one, the very first one is: use the time of a total stranger in such a way that he or she will not feel the time is wasted.
I think that is wonderfully important because writers, I think, as a whole, tend to be introverted and self-centered. Mm-hmm. Well, who isn't introverted and self-centered, really? But one thing that we are inclined to forget, I think, all too often, is that we have a partner in whatever we write, and that partner is the reader, because the story is not on the page that we write down. The story is in the head of the person that we communicate it to, and our job is to communicate it to that head. And if they don't get the picture that we sent them, it's because we didn't send it very clearly. So I think that is really the first thing that a writer has to think about in starting any new project is, what will this be and do and fulfill in the minds of our readers?
I totally agree. Another thing, too, is we are in competition for everything else that's demanding time on that reader. Be it work, children, things they're doing outside of work, Facebook, Tumblr, Twitter. I mean, come on. How many hours of our lives per day is wasted on social media? And I do mean wasted. We're in competition with that. We want to be able to make sure that our readers feel, as best they can, that they have actually spent whatever time they did spend on our reading, on our writing, as something worth their time and effort. That's my opinion.
For me, since I write primarily fiction, I want the reader to be able to step back and take a break from their reality in such a way that when they get done, they feel better. Like, yay, I just had a little fun. I forgot about my worries for a little while. And so that's a way to use that. And in doing that, you have to make sure your characters are compelling and can pull them in. And you're not going to do that if they felt like they wasted their time.
Agreed. And I'll say this. With my bill pay job, I get to read lots of boring legalese. Usually written by politicians or administrative agencies, and unless you really have a sense of what vocabulary of legalese, it would not otherwise make sense. Believe me, reading a fiction book that I can just lose myself into is more of a treat. Number 2, unless anyone else has anything for number 1. Give the reader at least one character he or she can root for.
I think that is terrifically important. There's a short-lived, and I think deservedly so, program, which was set in New York in Hell's Kitchen at the turn of the 19th century. No, the 20th century. Oh, for heaven's sake. It was set at about 1900.
There you go.
There we go. Finally makes some sense with it, maybe.
Copper? Or?
Yeah, that's what it was.
Yeah, I thought that's where you're going, yes.
Exactly. And it had in it exactly one sympathetic character. A very beautiful, young, eager cop who wanted to do the right thing. Mm-hmm. And damn it, they didn't kill him off. Mm-hmm. And I think it killed the program because after that, there was just nobody even a little bit likable.
Well, we've had a show on grimdark before here, but it's definitely a trend. I'm hoping it's a trend that's ending soon, of trying to make things hyper-realistic, and in doing so, making things really depressing. Mm-hmm. Because there is no lawful good character in real life. You know, there's no one who's going to do the right thing all the time. But to sort of cover that base, a lot of writers make everybody sort of despicable people. And, you know, they might have something good about them here or there, but no one's got a real, like, Boy Scout attitude any longer. And it makes it hard for some people to identify. It makes it hard for me to identify with characters when they're thinking all these terrible things. And personally, I'd like to go to my fiction to see a brighter side of the world most of the time.
I'm thinking of a show that was on 2 years ago called Dracula. Mm-hmm. And...
last year, I think. Go ahead.
Yeah. First off, the only character that wasn't a bad guy to some degree, I think, was Mia. And frankly, she was boring. So...
well, you have to write them well, too.
Yeah, well, yeah, but the point... Dracula and... oh, what's his name? His servant.
Yeah, thank you.
Dracula's right-hand man type.
Played by a great actor, too. I can't think of the actor's name.
Point is, Dracula was a bad guy. He did bad things. Mm-hmm. Everybody, again, except Mia, seemed to be doing bad things, but he was interesting and he got his side. He was the hero of his own story. Uh-huh. And while he was a bad guy and he was doing bad things, and this was a horror show, and it really didn't shy away from that, mm-hmm. It was, everybody was the hero of their own story, and this was Dracula's story. Rumsfeld, or not Rumsfeld, Rimsfield, or something. Rimfield.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. There you go.
But his relationship with Rimfield was very interesting.
Yes.
They really expanded the Rimfield character. They made him he had much more agency than the traditional one.
Well, a way to make a sympathetic character is to give them interpersonal relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Like, if they like someone else and someone else likes them, then we are also influenced to like them for the same reasons someone else sees. Like, oh, well, he's a good host. It's like, yeah, he's a good host. He does a good job taking care of his guests. That's a good thing about him that I can identify with. I also like to take care of my guests when I host, even though I don't eat people.
Which is a good thing.
Yes.
I've been to your parties, thank God, no of humans. No.
Nope,
I was going to say, creating sympathetic characters can be a tightrope, in my opinion. You make them, I'm going to use your term, Jen. You make them too much like a Boy Scout. Speaking of Boy Scouts, being one, it's kind of an interesting way to say this, but Superman's a Boy Scout, point blank. And I was bored with him when I was like 6 or 7 years old. Uh-huh. He's too goody two-shoes. You got to give
unless
a little...
he gets the red kryptonite.
Right. It was still coming out of the golden age. There was no red kryptonite at that time. But yes, you need to run a little dark with the light, or a little light with the dark to make the character good, or make the character interesting. But if you try to go for the everyman character, usually you gotta fail. Not always. There have been some successes, but they're not rare. They're not often.
I'm going to quote a podcast I really like to listen to called Previously Recorded. They usually podcast over video game footage on YouTube, so look them up. They're part of the Red Letter Media Studio, which I'm a very large fan of. But they were actually discussing Superman last week at some point, and how Jack, one of the commentators, said he has a hard time plugging into characters that are godlike. You know, and so of which Superman is one. He's an alien, but he's a godlike creature on Earth because he has all these magic powers, and he's a force for good or whatever. And they were discussing all the different iterations of Superman, and everyone, both members of the podcast agreed that the best Superman arc was the one not where he was feeling outcast and dark and sad, and not the one where he was glowing Adonis. It was the one where he was Clark Kent. And Clark Kent was trying to keep a job and do the best he can, being a part of human society because he felt like a human, because he was raised as a human, and also finding time to be Superman. And that was relatable, because we all know what it's like to try and hold down a job and do extracurricular activities. So that Superman, everybody agreed, that Superman, I wish I could remember who wrote him, but that version, that arc of Superman comics was the most relatable, and he was a more relatable character, not because he was dealing with these super, mannish feelings or whatever. It's because he was dealing with human feelings. He felt human, and it was more fun to watch him try and live his life because he felt human, and that's what sympathetic characters are.
I think a lot of characters, especially main characters, are an extension of their times in one way or another. Take Captain America, for example, another super do-gooder, came straight out of World War II when we needed optimism. Yep. We needed somebody who could come and make things right with the world. And that is true now, though we see it in a different format. We have lots and lots of dystopia going around in the movies and in the books and everything. And what do we find there? We find superheroes of a more common kind of means, like the Hunger Games. What's her name? Katniss. She starts out as a very ordinary person, and yet she becomes girl on fire and is able to save her sister and is no doubt going to save the entire dystopian planet before she's done. So I think that...
You haven't read the books, have you?
that is the kind of thing that we need.
The last movie's coming out this fall.
Well, whatever happens, I bet it's a Hollywood ending.
Only if they change it.
They will, I bet.
Along those lines, let me shoot a TV show that's now just restarted, which is Heroes Reborn. And if you ever watched the whole entire series of Heroes, you've got ordinary people dealing with suddenly, oh my god, I've got superpowers. How did this happen? And society eventually dealing with them, from killing them off to capturing to try and turn them evil or whatever, to now, if you've watched the new version, they've got to register. If they don't register, they go to jail. People are putting them in concentration camps. So yes, exactly what you're talking about.
And Tom Cruise saves the world, once a year.
Oh yeah, at least MI5 not MI5, but Mission Impossible. Okay, moving on. And this is something which I have to remind myself all the time when I'm writing. Number 3, every character should want something, even if it is only a glass of water. No character should be acting just to be acting. They should want something. And yes, this is where I had problems with John Steinbeck. That one book, which I'm going to leave alone. But the idea is that good and bad are actually after something. They're after usually opposite goals, or same goal but opposite means.
And a person can be conflicted as well, wanting two different things that are opposite to each other at the same time.
I want to rule the world, but I want to save the world.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Lex Luthor. No.
Like how very 3 laws of robotics for you.
Actually, the 3 rules are a perfect example.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think you take it just one step further, that every character should want something in every scene.
Yes.
It's not enough to have just the long-term goal and the long-term story arc. You need one for every scene that you have, too.
And that's what actually what creates character conflict.
Exactly.
In the short term and long term of the
Yes.
story.
I think one thing we need to remember too is because we're writing these books and these characters, it's not the same as a visual effect like
Right.
when you're doing TV. So you have to give every character some type of background because your reader is not going to know it. You might know it in your head, but that's not good enough. You have to translate that. Otherwise, the character, if the scene can go by without the character, then you don't need the character.
There was a meme or a cartoon I saw once that, while it was funny, it also reveals when you don't do a very good character. The meme was I'm going to call it a meme. It was probably a cartoon. Yeah, it was a cartoon. The character was some type of clerk, like a gas station clerk or whatever. Another character walks in. They ask the question. He answered it. Guy walks away, and the clerk goes, "Oh my God, I really am just a bit character."
But that actually brings up a point.
Is that every character?
There are bit characters.
There are big characters, but you should treat them with a level of respect because they are within their own story. Technically, a big character, in my opinion, for whatever it's worth, is your story just happened to clip into their story. You came in and out. They still got their own story, which probably will never be aired or shown.
Or sometimes possibly they decide that they do want their own story and they start shouting in your head and that's how a sequel comes out.
Yeah, or a spin-off, yes. Yeah, I was going to avoid those. Okay.
Rosencrantz and Guildenstern.
Yes.
When we write, number 4, every sentence must do one of two things. And if you're really not doing these, you've got a problem. Which is either A, reveal character, or B, advance the action.
Actually, I would add one thing to that.
Go for
I
it.
think it can be entertaining.
Yes.
That is, it can be funny. There
Well, it
are
needs to
other
be.
ways of maintaining an audience than those two. So while I agree with that, I don't disagree with it. I think there might be just another possibility or two in there, too.
Especially when it comes to with what I write.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's a different
There
type
is
of
that.
action there going on.
There is a twist to that idea, yes.
Some things are sort of inherently interesting.
Yes.
And I think that you're not doing a disservice by using a few of those.
It doesn't have to be funny. It could be horrifying. It could be... But it's something... You're giving the reader something.
Something emotional or some other kind of satisfying, or what we hope to be a satisfying response in them.
But please don't make it where the person wants to slam the book and throw it across the room in a trash can.
Oh, there are even worse things than that, probably.
Yes.
Anyway, on the use of language, this is something about a story that KURT Vonnegut wrote. It's about the story Palm Sunday. And it is a plea to make language very simple. And I'm just going to read it. Remember that two great masters of language, William Shakespeare and James Joyce, wrote sentences which were almost childlike when their subjects were the most profound. To be or not to be? Asks Shakespeare's Hamlet. The longest word is 3 letters long. Joyce, when he was frisky, could put together a sentence as intricate and glittering as a necklace for Cleopatra. But my favorite sentence in his short story Eveline is this one. She was tired. At that point in the story, no other words could break the heart of a reader as those 3 words do. Simplicity of language is not only reputable, but perhaps sacred. The Bible opens with a sentence well within the writing skills of a lively 14-year-old. In the beginning, God created heaven and the earth.
It is a good point. You don't, based on what you're writing, if you're writing science fiction, you're going to throw some big words out there. But like write for your audience, basically, because there would be no need for me to use these big, long, obscure words in a vampire erotica. I mean, that would just seem very out of place. So I think that's where you got to write towards your audience.
There's, I agree. You need to write towards your audience. And there's always been a saying or a rule out there that I totally agree with. Don't treat your audience like they're idiots. Sometimes if you go too low on the language, and what I mean by low, I'm talking about grade levels, then the person feels like an idiot. But there's times if you try to use $10 words, as they say, or dollar words, yeah, you're talking above them and you're trying to show off, and that's going to lose your audience and make your audience feel like an idiot on top of it.
Well, I think that was the point that this author was trying to make, that when it's the most profound, you can't afford to have anybody miss the point.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. And that's why you have to use short, little words then that get straight to the heart of the matter. Mm-hmm. Other times you might be a little more embellishing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Number 5. Number 5 is, I find interesting because we've always been told, write in medias res, right in the middle of things.
Yeah.
Well, number 5 is not quite that. Number 5 says, start as close to the end as possible.
Well, I don't think he means, start with the black moment, because you have to have some build up to that,
right,
or nobody will even understand what the black moment is. So starting as soon as possible is not starting there. Mm-hmm. It is starting in the middle of things. Yeah. I think he's saying the same thing in different words.
Maybe, I don't know. I read that as your ending is... You can't start on your ending. When I'm saying this, don't get me wrong. You can't start on your ending. I'm thinking that moving it closer to the ending, not so much in the middle, but move it as close to the end as possible, because that's where all your actions should be at. But,
well,
I don't know. Maybe yeah. You're right. Maybe you're saying tomato, I'm saying tomato. Let's call the whole thing off. Okay.
I think he would really maintain, and I actually heard KURT Vonnegut speak some years ago, and it was at Washington University. Oh. And he was scheduled to speak in the chapel, which, I don't know if you've been there, but it seats 100 and some people. It's not very big. And it was filled up well before lunchtime, and he was supposed to speak at 4:30. And so they moved it to the field house, and that eventually filled up too, because he was there. He was a wonderful speaker, and he struck that theme too of simplicity. And he did say one thing that I remembered, what his favorite book was. Anybody? He gave himself an A+ on Slaughterhouse-Five.
Okay.
So that's just a totally aside the point thing. What I was going to say, though, about starting as close to the end as possible is that I think he would say, get rid of the backstory. Mm-hmm. Get rid of all the preliminaries. Get rid of anything you can get rid of that isn't direct action leading toward the black moment.
Agreed. I would definitely agree with that. Number 6, unless anyone else has anything on number 5. Wow, we're going through this list pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. Number 6, I am in total agreement with 1,000%, and I know Melanie has seen enough of my writing to know, yes, I am this bad. Number 6, be a sadist. No matter how sweet and innocent your leading characters, make awful things happen to them in order that the reader may see what they are made of. Yes, I am completely, totally evil to my characters.
I think of Charlene Harris when we saw her speak, and she was talking about how she would put her character through all kinds of trauma, and I think that is really what made a big impact when they even changed those to the TV show True Blood, because she went through everything.
Oh, yeah.
And she talked about how her and, Jim Butcher were in competition on who could put their characters through more bad stuff.
Perhaps I'm a pansy, but it doesn't sound like fun to just watch people suffer all the time. And I don't like to write characters that suffer all the time. There has to be some sort of a lantern they can carry.
I don't really get this so much for Charlene Harris, but Jim Butcher really likes writing the underdog character. And underdog characters are always being dropped into the deep end of the pool.
Yeah, and hope they can swim.
No, they don't know how to swim. They have to learn how to swim while they're drowning. That's the
That's
point.
What I mean by hope that they can swim. I didn't say hope they know how to swim. I hope they can swim.
Yeah.
Sarah Paresky, who writes the V.I. Warshawski series.
Oh, I love those series.
I do too. They're great fun. She actually put a contest up on her site saying that she had a VI stabbed, shot, strangled, a whole bunch of other things, and she ran the contest to see if they could come up with some more inventive way of trying to get her killed that she could not be killed by, of course.
It's opening up a can of worms there, asking the internet for that.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I can see that turning rather sideways pretty easily.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure author's discretion on whether or not the suggestions were going to be taken.
Oh, no, I don't mean she was planning to use it.
And the level of sadism that you use on your characters, I think, varies by what you write. And the audience. Like, Jen, you call yourself a pansy. I don't call you a pansy. I call you a middle grade and young adult writer.
This is true.
Which, there are a lot of books that go through hell. The characters can go through hell in a story, but they are generally not... This is pure opinion based on what I've read. And I'm no expert in the young adult middle grade. But the ones I have read, they don't quite go through the hell that some adult books will go through. I mean, I don't mean the erotica. I'm talking about stuff that that Fedora writes, or that I would write, or KURT himself wrote.
My vampire series.
Yeah.
My characters go through quite a bit.
I mean, there's a story. I've changed away from vampire because I feel vampire's been overdone too much. But, you know, that's life. But I'm basing the paranormal creature is based on a Russian fairy tale. But when it was a vampire, this guy gets released from a prison he's been in for 2 centuries. He goes wandering in the woods. He feeds off a deer. And as he's kind of wandering, he's lost or whatever. He sees a road. He's on the road. And next thing you know, he gets hit. And then from there, he gets taken to the ER, where there's a post-traumatic stress disorder doctor, guy who's suffering from it, not that he treats it. And he's trying to find a cure for why people die. And he comes across this character. And he basically kidnaps him, takes him out of the office, takes him out of the hospital, puts him in his own little basement, starts experimenting on him, and injects his blood into the poor innocent who hit the damn vampire. Yeah, I'm sadistic.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, that just kind of reminded me of another story, and I can't think which one.
Who knows?
Not everything, just pieces.
Yeah. And, you know,
I actually see similarity between my female character. She was kidnapped as a child, and she was the lab rat.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, honestly, people, I've never read
She
these
has
books,
not
so-
read my book, though.
No.
Oh, yes, not.
Number 7. Write to please just one person. If you open a window and make love to the world, so to speak, your story will get pneumonia.
That's
Yes.
a great turn of phrase.
yeah.
I love that phrase.
I'm not sure I'd put it that way, but I agree you can't write to please everybody.
No.
You have to write to your audience. I'm not sure your audience is one person, but, you know.
Well, yeah, your audience it should be one person.
It's me.
You.
One at a time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's you, and then
Go from there.
Well, Stephen King's audience was his wife.
Yeah.
He writes all his books to entertain her, and she's his beta and only revision copy, content editor. And what she doesn't like, he takes out. Unless, I guess, I'm sure he'd leave some stuff in that she doesn't like if he likes it specifically. But that's his audience. That's who he writes for, is his wife.
Who, by the way, took out his first novel out of a trash can and sent it in for him. Mm-hmm. So,
Which novel is that?
Carrie.
Carrie.
Okay.
I think there are a lot of interesting couples like that. The Lutzes, for example. She's his primary reader, and Christine Matthews, and
That was kind of like the opposite of, I forget which author it was, Victor Hugo or somebody, that wrote Frankenstein, or one of them.
Mary
no,
Shelley.
or
That was Mary
no,
Shelley.
that was Mary Shelley. No,
Victor Hugo
Dr.
wrote-
Dr. Jekyll and Mr.
that was
Robert Louis
Stevenson.
Stevenson's.
Yeah, well,
Stevens?
one of these books, He had one of these books. I'm not thinking the right one, but his wife burned the first copy because she thought it was vile,
Oh,
and he had to rewrite it.
that's not a lot of support.
Yeah, but then again, he had to rewrite it. So maybe the rewrite was better than the original that was burned. You know.
Well,
I don't know.
okay,
It
on a
probably would be more
sidebar to
bitter.
that, I'll throw out Ernest Hemingway.
Yeah.
Hemingway was having trouble getting published. His wife, he got an offer from someone, I forget how the true story was, the guy wanted to see his works. His wife put his works on a train, and the train system promptly lost every single thing he wrote. And he had to go back and rewrite, and all his rewrites are what we've read. So, sometimes this could be good. But no, go ahead.
Well, I think for a lot of people, we write to please a specific audience. That is a niche. I am a niche writer. Lee is a niche writer. You are a niche writer in a way,
Jen.
right?
Yeah, a little bit
young,
bigger.
Young adult.
My niche is an entire age group. But yes.
Well, okay, yeah. And you write mysteries, right? And you write science fiction. So we all have a target audience that we're looking at of various sizes and interests. And we know what pleases them that may not please others. For example, mine is historical mystery. And one of the things I take a lot of time with is the foreword or postword, wherever I put it, I'm not sure always where to put it, which gives the factual information that I might have changed, or what the basic facts are that I find fascinating. Because many people who read historical mysteries or historical fiction in general look at that first. They read it right after they read the back blurb cover. And then they read that, and then they read the first page or so to see if they like it. Because they want a grounding in the history that it is, and they want to know that you know something about it. And so you are playing to your niche if you do that kind of thing. And other people wouldn't do the same thing. I don't know. What would you do?
Well, with me, mine came about because I lived in an area where you could not get vampire romance. I lived in Poplar Bluff. The only book that was out was the movie edition of Dracula.
Okay.
And that's the only vampire romance you could get, which wasn't even written as a romance that much, honestly. So I started writing my own. And so really when I started writing, I didn't start writing for others. I wrote because I wrote what I wanted to read that I couldn't find out there. And so I put the elements I wanted to see in there. My vampires still fed on people for the most part. They didn't always kill the people they fed on. They would stop, and they would sometimes wipe their memory of being fed on. But I looked for that because, to me, that was a vampire. The vampires that ate rabbits weren't vampires. I mean, so I just kind of did that, and that's how that developed. And then later on, when I actually started looking at possibly publishing my stuff, then I started looking more towards, I need to add more of give it happy endings. Because my first stuff in Bound by Blood, which is the very first stuff I ever wrote, even though it's not the first novel I put out, all has sad endings. You can't have sad endings in everything you write, but it works for that one because it also is mixed with horror. And you can't have horror and happy ever afters together. So it works.
Yeah, you can. Just
Not generally speaking.
Generally speaking, it doesn't work.
Generally speaking, happy endings and horror do not mix.
But when you start writing for romance, you have to have that happy ending, or it's not a romance. It doesn't matter what you put the people through. As long as it ends happy, it's okay.
And I really don't like that definition because Romeo and Juliet isn't a romance according to that definition.
No.
Depends on which version.
And
It's a tragedy. Hello, it's
There's
a
a
tragedy.
third version that
romantic
would
tragedy.
Of Romeo and Juliet.
of Romeo and Juliet. There's one version which they both survive.
and there's technically the
Nothing
only
Shakespeare wrote, I'll tell
No,
you.
he had alternate endings.
and technically the big difference between erotic and erotic romance is erotic romance has to have the happy ever after. Erotica only has to have the happy for now ending. That's the really not the steam level is not the true definition of the difference. It's the ending. That's the only difference.
And those are the audiences that you're writing for.
Right.
And you write specifically in order to meet their expectations.
Meet that ending that they're expecting.
What do you do with with juvenile or young adult that maybe we want to do in science fiction or mystery?
Well, it's mostly constraint on the age group of your main cast. Your main character has to fit within the age group of the people who are reading. I have the ghost story I'm writing right now. My main character falls outside that spectrum, and so I suspect that if I get it published, it's probably not going to end up being a YA because it doesn't fit that rule. You know, the 16 to 18-year-old protagonist who's going on a coming-of-age story adventure or a romance adventure. It's all about interpersonal relationships and growing up. And whether it's growing up because you fall in love and you get your heart broken, and it usually works out in the end. But you don't have those kind of rules set on you for YA. And because YA is an age group, not a genre. The genre narrows it down. If you have a YA romance, well then you've got the same rules that Lee was just talking about. But that has, I mean, when you get younger and younger, the rules get bigger and bigger, depending on what kind of language you can use, what you can write with, how many words you can use, whether it complies with school age, like core curriculum things. There's a lot to consider in all the different age groups for kids.
How about in science fiction? Is there anything special you're supposed to do?
Well, Dave could both Dave and Brad can probably answer this, but a lot of this has to do with science fiction is what subgenre of science fiction you're in. Because, for instance, there's hard sci-fi and there's soft sci-fi. There is
Space opera.
Well, yeah, and then there is it science fiction or is it fantasy? Now, that's a big one. And I've heard many different definitions, and there are more technical definitions, but who was it? Orson Scott Card was once told if it has trees or basically, in order to be science fiction, and this was probably in the 70s that he was given this definition, so it's probably a bit different today with the biological revolution. But way back when, in the technical age, before Watson and Crick and DNA was so well known, it was if you had, robots on the cover, if you had a spaceship on the cover, then it was science fiction. And if you had, like, trees or plants on the cover, then it was fantasy. But, now it's different because now you can have a purely biological sci-fi. For instance, Jurassic Park would be considered sci-fi. Mm-hmm. But basically the definition is sci-fi is a future that could happen, more or less. And fantasy could take place in any time period, and it couldn't happen unless the rules are significantly different, as in magic is real.
Mm-hmm. To sum it all up, it would seem to me that everything about the book is geared toward a specific audience, and that's what we like. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes the audiences can transfer in genres, and sometimes they can't. That's why I write science fiction mystery or science fiction crime drama, because not every mystery reader likes science fiction, but a lot of science fiction readers also read mysteries. So there's a cross genre.
Well, in science fiction, there's very little pure science fiction that isn't also something else.
Mm-hmm. Okay, go ahead.
I think it's good to cross genres as well. You do cast the net for a wider audience. And then I think that as like with me being primarily erotic romance, I've had to do that myself. It wasn't intentional at first, but I had some mystery in there or a little bit of this or that, and that way you can open up someone that say is not reading it for the romance, they're reading it because there's the serial killer or there's the psychic because of the fantasy element. Then you've just added some new elements in there that might catch a reader that you wouldn't have caught before if you had been so narrow.
I find pure romances are almost always, to me, boring because I like plots, and a pure romance plot is entirely predictable. Pure romance.
Yes.
No, a whole lot of romance, they put at least something else in. It's romantic suspense, it's romantic mystery, romantic something else.
I originally started reading the pure romance, and then eventually I started getting my hands on some of the romance, paranormal, and mystery.
Some
and
romance writers have just
suspense.
such beautiful styles. I feel like, ooh, come on, can I just give you a plot?
One thing, too, one audience that we're not talking about. Well, yes, we are talking about, but we're not talking about it in the aspect which I'm going to go down. We're talking about our niche audiences that exist. You know, science fiction, mystery, romance, young adult, steampunk.
Yeah.
By the way, Brad snuck in over the last couple minutes
Yes,
here.
hello all. I'll join you in a second, I'm sure.
Yeah, but we're also, each one of us has a brand. Each one of us picks up readers along the way, fans along the way, and they expect us to stay with our brand, to stick with what our brand is. And I will say, having read some people who have done this, when you break the brand, you break the reader, and they tend to go away.
J.K. Rowling when she didn't write a Harry Potter novel.
There's that.
That's why she tried to
But
publish it under a different
everybody's
name.
ready for the next
Exactly.
Harry Potter.
And names are wonderful things.
I do know of one author who is very famous. I'm not going to mention her. She's still publishing. But she made me walk away for 20 years. I wouldn't come back to her. Finally did because someone convinced me to read another book of hers. And I was like, okay, but I'm still hesitant when I pick up one of her books. It happens, but that's the other part. Okay, final rule number 8. Give your readers as much information as possible as soon as possible. To heck with suspense. Ouch. Okay. To heck with suspense. Readers should have such complete understanding of what is going on, where and why, that they could finish the stories themselves should cockroaches eat the last few pages.
Is that pretty much the opposite of what the rule really was?
No.
No.
Yeah.
Now, if you read a Vonnegut book, I mean, it's very clear why Vonnegut does this. And to be honest, it's a style that works for Vonnegut. Is it a style that's going to work for every mystery author out there?
For any mystery author?
Good point.
Yeah, no.
Not going to work. However, I write adventure novels. I could totally lay you out the entire beginning chunk of my story, and you'd probably be able to figure out the end. So there's nothing wrong with that. You know, it's an adventure. It's fun. It's meant to be, you know, you're going to know you're going across Africa.
But speaking of Romeo and Juliet, the opening monologue of that does tell you the entire plot of the play.
Well, that's the Shakespearean way. He invites a prologue guy to come out and just explain what you're going to see.
Chorus.
Yes.
Wonderful thing. If we could only have choruses today.
For real life, you mean?
No, in
I would like
literature.
one for my life. It would be nice to know what comes next.
My narrator is Chorus. Of course, I always picture him either as Derek Jacobi or Orson Welles. It's weird. Anyway,
Okay.
I know. Weird moment.
Can we get Richard Attenborough or something?
Whichever Jen first. And
Okay. I think that as far as writing suspense goes, there's definitely some value to not putting too much in. Mostly because now I admit I'm a bit older than most people who would be reading my genre, but when I'm reading a book geared toward teenage kids and they're laying the suspense on so thick and I've already guessed what's going to happen next, then I stop being entertained and start becoming horribly cynical.
Yes.
And then the book no longer is, I can't wait to see what happens next in this adventure. It's now, this author needs to work on their craft more, and I start picking it apart from a writer point of view instead of a reader point of view. So that moment where you lose your audience is what you're trying to avoid when you just sit around. You're like, but you gotta wait till what comes next. You better turn that page. Wait till what comes next. It's gonna be awesome. I promise it's gonna be awesome. Just hold on for the next chapter.
direct Thailand, then I'm going to go to Lee, then Brad. I write multiple drafts, as we all do, but I've talked about my style of writing some time ago, and one of my drafts I call the Hitchcock draft. I go through my story looking for suspense moments where I do exactly what you just talked about. It's like I'm over-dramatizing the suspense. And I sit back and go, okay, if this was a film, what would Hitchcock do? And that's why I rewrite it. Brad, or unless you got tied in.
I was just to throw in an example, a funny example. I watch a lot of Mystery Science Theater. Makes me think immediately of the end of the episode called Werewolf. The girl is walking slowly up the stairs, with her hair all teased, and the three guys, because the premise of Mystery Science Theater is that it's three guys at the bottom of the screen mocking the movie they're watching.
Well, it's a guy and two robots.
It's a guy and two robots. But every step she took, they're like, and she's a werewolf. And she's a werewolf. And she's a werewolf. And, they drove the suspense out, and Every is like, and she turns around and she's a werewolf, and then she turned around, they're like, there it is.
I just wanted to remind, what was it, last week when we were talking about, information overload, I believe it was. And I think that's where you got to be careful. You want to give some information to intrigue, but you got to leave something back so the person will turn the page and keep reading, like she said.
Mm-hmm. Well, here's kind of one of the things that Vonnegut's talking about here, and this only kind of goes into one aspect of it. I mean, there's multiple aspects here, but descriptions are a great thing. So I have the Sparrowhawk, which anyone who's read my novel knows is the kick-ass airship that flies through my novel. And one of the things Vonnegut's meaning is I should not take the Sparrowhawk descriptions and paste them over the entire book.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
There's no need for that. Even though, as you're saying, you don't want an info dump. You don't want a 6-page description of this airship and down to the minutest detail.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
However,
we're not writing 1800s anymore.
in the first third of the book, every reader should know what that thing looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Be able to have a clear image in their head of it, have a clear understanding of it, and I think that's one of the things Vonnegut's meaning here, is to get information to the reader to the point where the reader doesn't need you to hold their hand through the rest of the story. Mm-hmm. And it can happen with characters. What does your character look like, act like, feel like, There shouldn't be some sort of last chapter reveal where suddenly like, oh no, he has an allergy to peanuts and he just had a Snickers. Oh my god! That's the kind of thing you'd want to lead in early on, that he has an allergy to peanuts, and then drop the Snickers in the last chapter or something like that. I think this is some of the things Vonnegut's meaning here.
Yeah, this is kind of where the culture of your reader comes in too, because you can paint a description and people will fill in the blanks. But if they fill in the blanks wrong, you have a problem. It just recalled in the Hunger Games, which came up, apparently a lot of people were complaining because a certain reasonably minor character in the first book was cast as a black girl. But the thing is, she was a black girl in the book. And the thing is, again, she was described as being black in the book. I got that from reading the book, but apparently a lot of the readers read right over that. So,
yeah, there's a hashtag for Star Wars for the same reason.
Yeah.
Huh?
That's the whole thing.
Yeah, let's not go into that right now.
Please. Yeah, a bunch of idiots. That's all there are.
A simple Google search would tell our listener exactly what we're talking about.
If
Star Wars, race hashtag, go for it.
Oh, okay.
It's wrong.
Well, I would add that there's more than one kind of story in fiction. Brad touched upon this. What a mystery writer is going for, or a romance writer, is a story arc, which starts you in one place, goes up to a difficult crisis, and then it ends. Okay? But there are also picaresque novels that do not do that. They are more episodic, and the episodes are little adventures. They're little story arcs, if you like, and you could probably take out one or more, and the story would be still a story. And that way you would be able to figure out the ending of it if you chose to. A Don Quixote or a Three Musketeers, for example, fills that kind of model. So there's more than one kind of model that you can talk about. And Vonnegut's is more akin to that one than to a mystery.
Yes.
So I gotta say, with all due respect, I don't agree.
And on that note, I think I'm going to go ahead and end this episode. So everyone, tune in next week for yet another interesting topic in the writing industry. And have a great week writing. Thank you for listening. The new theme songs for Right Pack Radio were written and performed by Meredith Tate. All copyrights remain with her. Right Pack Radio would like to thank STL Books for allowing us to record in their office. STL Books is a online bookstore specializing in new and used high-quality literature, children's books, and books written by or about St. Louis. Please visit them online at www.stlbooks.com or find their store on the Amazon.com website.